Welcome to NTD News. I'm Kevin Hogan. Here are today's top stories. The border crisis puts a dent in President Biden's approval rating. What are some of the major concerns about his border policies? Biden wants Congress to pass another multi-trillion-dollar spending bill. Democrat leaders say they're willing to pass it without Republicans. How do they plan to avoid the filibuster this time? House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's husband made some changes to their stock portfolio just before Biden took office. Now the couple is set to cash in from Biden's infrastructure bill. Democrats in the Senate are taking aim at Trump-era tax reforms. That's while the former president rejects a New York Times story from refunds from his campaign account. And the U.S. and Iran are set to begin nuclear talks today. President Biden wants the U.S. back in the Iran nuclear deal, but the Iranian regime won't be speaking directly to the U.S. A Navy hospital corpsman shot and injured 2 people in Maryland. The shooting took place either in or near a concrete business at a Maryland business park. The 38-year-old suspect left the shooting scene and drove 10 minutes to the Fort Detrick military base, where he was killed by military officials. The director of marketing for Nicolak Paving Stones says one of the victims entered his business looking for help, but was not inside of the store at the time of the shooting. The victims were flown to a hospital with critical injuries. We don't know the motive of the shooting yet, but Frederick Police Chief Jason Lando says the situation is now over and the public is safe. Health and Human Services has opened 2 more holding facilities for migrant children in Texas. The border crisis is raising more concerns and putting a dent in President Biden's approval rating. That's as Border Patrol says they caught 2 men crossing into the country who were on the FBI's terror watch list. Here are the details.
The Biden administration has opened 2 more emergency holding facilities for unaccompanied minors. Both are in Texas and received their first group of children Monday. They join a growing list of intake sites and overflow facilities for children. The border influx has renewed concerns about suspected terrorists taking advantage of the crisis. Border Patrol says this year they've apprehended 2 men on the FBI's terrorism watch list and no-fly list. Both are from Yemen. Border agents arrested the first man, a 33-year-old, in late January. They arrested the second man, a 26-year-old, in late March. Both crossed into California illegally. And terrorism isn't the only concern. On Monday, Senator Lindsey Graham again urged Dr. Anthony Fauci to assess if Biden's border policies are creating a super spreader event. Graham asked Fauci, is the Biden administration undermining the work to stop the spread of COVID-19 with the current policies and procedures in place? I think so, but you are the expert. Graham's letter comes days after Fauci said he's too busy to visit the border after Republicans criticized him for being silent on the matter. A new poll says a majority of Americans disapprove of how Biden is handling the border crisis and immigration. One Trump supporter in Wisconsin says Biden's border policies go against the government's health policies for Americans.
They have to social distance, wear masks, shut down small businesses, but yet then we're okay allowing an influx of people from other countries that aren't vaccinated, that don't have any of the things that we're told to do, and it's okay.
A Biden supporter and first-generation Indian American says he thinks the issue is a priority for Biden because he put the vice president in charge of it.
Having said that, they don't know what to do. There is no set law, there is no set framework, and this is why I disapprove.
The AP NORC poll found that 55% disapprove of Biden's job on border security, and 56% disapprove of his job on immigration. Despite this, the poll found that Biden's overall approval stands at 61%.
The Senate's official rulemaker grants a favorable judgment to Democrats. It allows them to pass another big spending bill without any Republican votes. Elizabeth McDonough is the Senate parliamentarian. She ruled that Democrats can use the budget reconciliation process again this year. The ruling means Republicans can't filibuster President Joe Biden's infrastructure proposal. Democrats can instead rely on their slim majority to pass the $2.25 trillion bill. They won't need any Republican votes. Democrats already used the process this year to pass Biden's $1.9 trillion COVID-19 relief package. Energy Secretary Jennifer Granholm says Biden is prepared to pass his infrastructure package without any Republican support. Biden's version of the bill increases the corporate tax rate from 21% to 28%. The plan also calls for a global minimum corporate tax rate. Biden says this is because many Fortune 500 companies don't pay any federal taxes. Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell says Republicans won't support the bill. He says it doesn't focus enough on infrastructure. Instead, it funds far-left priorities. He says Republicans want a more modest plan that doesn't raise taxes. The Tax Foundation is a tax policy think tank. They released a report on the proposed tax increases. They say it will lead to slower economic growth and reduced wages. Democrats need moderate Senator Joe Manchin to support the bill. He says the current proposal needs changes before he'll vote for it. He says he prefers a 25% corporate tax rate. The White House says this is the first of a two-part plan that Biden wants Congress to pass. Biden will propose another multi-trillion-dollar plan focused on children and health care. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi could personally benefit from Biden's infrastructure bill. This is from stocks her husband bought as Biden was preparing to take office. One of Pelosi's people said she didn't know about the stock purchases. Take a look.
Nancy Pelosi disclosed that her husband bought between $500,000 and $1 million worth of Tesla stock in December. The electric car maker is likely to be a big winner from Biden's infrastructure plan. The plan budgets $174 billion for electric vehicle subsidies. Now Tesla stock is up, and Pelosi is expected to vote in favor of the bill. Biden also announced plans to replace the entire fleet of federal vehicles with electric cars. It isn't known how many of them will be from Tesla. Drew Hamill is Pelosi's deputy chief of staff. He told Fox News that the speaker didn't know about the stock purchases. Congressional spouses can legally trade stocks as long as they don't have inside information. Pelosi is not the only member of Congress accused of skirting the rules. Several senators were investigated for their stock trades last year. They made the trades as the CCP virus pandemic started. They were getting private briefings about the virus at the same time. Some lawmakers want to tighten ethics rules around Congress members purchasing stocks. Elizabeth Warren introduced a bill to ban individual stock purchases by members of Congress. Her bill includes additional ethics rules. It would ban former members of Congress from acting as lobbyists and tighten federal conflict of interest rules.
As Biden returned to the White House on Monday, he said he'd be talking a lot about infrastructure, but he didn't say exactly who he'd be speaking with. Biden says his infrastructure plan will create thousands of jobs, but it would also give the government a greater role in the economy than it's had in generations. NTD's Melina Wisecup takes a closer look.
One selling point for Biden's infrastructure plan is that it will create jobs. It's actually dubbed the American Jobs Plan.
It's the largest American jobs investment since World War II. It will create millions of jobs. Good-paying jobs will grow the economy.
A Hillsdale economic professor agrees that it will create jobs, but he says the important question to ask is, will these jobs add value to the country's overall economic growth?
With the kinds of things that government does, often these things should be seen as make work. They're not really creating value. It's as if you're digging a ditch and then filling it back up, digging it again, filling it back up. It's true, somebody's been put to work, but is that work productive?
Steele says some products the government makes are indeed productive, but they tend to be less productive than the private sector. That's because the government doesn't have price signals to assess the value of its products.
Officials have an incentive to increase costs and no incentive to create value. And so government tends to be very wasteful. And so the bigger the share of government, the more waste in the economy and the less sustainable it is.
And this infrastructure plan would move employment from the private sector, where it tends to be more productive, to the hands of the government, where it's less productive, expanding the government's economic role while the private sector contracts. Some deem this as a good thing, to move away from a capitalist free market system. But Steele says a look at history can explain why this approach could be dangerous for the U.S. economy.
In the Soviet Union, they produced lots and lots of stuff. They had shortages of things that people actually needed. They had surpluses of things that people didn't want, but they produced stuff. That is, it took valuable resources and made stuff that wasn't as valuable as what they started with. And that's really what wrecked their economy.
And this infrastructure plan will be a top priority for Congress when they come back in session next week. It's likely to pass in the House, but it's unlikely to pass in the Senate with no Republican support so far. But Senate Leader Chuck Schumer is looking to get around the need for that Republican support by using a second budget reconciliation this year. And that hasn't been done before, so we're still waiting on a decision from the Senate advisory to see if Schumer can move forward with that plan. Reporting in Washington, D.C., Melina Weiskup, NTD News.
The Supreme Court dismissed a lawsuit on whether former President Trump could block critics on Twitter. They said the case is moot because Trump is no longer president. In the ruling, Justice Clarence Thomas took aim at social media networks for their seemingly unchecked power to silence voices, including former President Trump's. He said Twitter made it clear that the right to cut off speech lies most powerfully in the hands of private digital platforms. He suggested these companies may not have the right to regulate speech under the First Amendment. This may undermine their protection under Section 230 in the future. Thomas said the Supreme Court will likely have no choice but to intervene in the growing debate over big tech. Democrats in the Senate are putting forward big changes to former President Trump's tax reforms. Trump's reforms were meant to bring companies' offshore income back to the U.S., but Democrats say these reforms will incentivize companies to invest overseas. And more on Trump, who dismissed a New York Times article alleging he used questionable fundraising tactics during his 2020 campaign. Here are the details.
Democrat Senators Ron Wyden, Sherrod Brown, and Mark Warner are proposing corporate tax hikes. They're similar to those that Biden proposed to foot the bill for his $2 trillion infrastructure plan. The tax hike targets rules in Trump's 2017 Tax and Jobs Act. That act governs how the foreign income from companies is taxed. Trump's reforms give companies lower tax rates for their offshore income if they bring it back stateside. The idea is those profits could be invested in American jobs. But these Democrats are saying the reforms just made those companies want to invest more overseas. That way they can take advantage of the new tax exemptions. The Democrats' plan would level off these tax rates for offshore profits and bring them closer to the main corporate rate. It would also incentivize these companies to make their headquarters in the United States. Former President Trump dismissed a New York Times article that claims he engaged in questionable fundraising tactics during his last campaign. He accused the paper of publishing a one-sided attack piece. The New York Times reported the Trump campaign kicked back millions of dollars in refunds to his donors. The paper cited its own investigation that claims some donors unknowingly agreed to accept weekly campaign donation payments. Trump commented on this through his Save America PAC on Monday. He said, "Our support in 2020 was so big, never before seen, received more votes than any sitting president in history by far, that it has become a major threat to the Democrat Party," which explains why the New York Times immediately rushed to defend their radical left allies. The New York Times hasn't responded to a request for comment.
Major League Baseball is facing backlash for boycotting Georgia. Just one day before the Georgia boycott, the organization extended a contract with a company that has close ties to the Chinese Communist Party. Here are the details.
Major League Baseball, or MLB, is facing backlash over its boycott of Georgia. This is because it's willing to do big business with Chinese state-owned companies and companies with close ties to the Chinese Communist Party, known for its human rights abuses, but it's boycotting the Peach State over election reforms. MLB has been doing business in China for years, but it's just come to light that only one day before MLB boycotted Georgia, the organization extended and even expanded its contract with Chinese tech giant Tencent, which has significant ties to the CCP. MLB claims Georgia's new voting laws amount to voter suppression. MLB Commissioner Robert Manfred said in a statement that the Georgia boycott would demonstrate MLB's values as a sport. But now, many people are wondering what exactly those values are, given the CCP's ongoing human rights abuses and genocide of Uyghur Muslims. Former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo shared an article on Twitter about MLB's partnership with Beijing Enterprises Real Estate Group, a top Chinese state-owned enterprise, and wrote, "Georgia's laws don't comport with MLB's values, but China's do?" Kentucky Senator Rand Paul said, "Your sports league might be a little too woke if it will freely do business with communists in China and Cuba, but boycott a U.S. state that wants people to show ID to vote." Arkansas Senator Tom Cotton responded to the Georgia boycott saying, "Hey MLB, how many days of early voting are allowed in China?" And General Spaulding, author of Stealth War, How China Took Over While America's Elite Slept, wrote, "The all-American game is now all communist. Also, it wants no voter ID. Are you still blind to what's happening in America?" The CCP continues to carry out numerous human rights violations and religious persecution. Yet many large corporations have turned a blind eye to these atrocities in order to gain access to the China market. But over the last couple of years, as many of these corporations make accusations of oppression and human rights abuses in the United States while still doing business in China, a movement to boycott these corporations has gained momentum. A number of people are already saying they're canceling their MLB subscriptions.
The U.S. and Iran begin indirect talks aimed at reviving the Iran nuclear deal. The 2015 deal was overturned during the Trump administration. Officials from Britain, France, and Germany are expected to pass communications between U.S. and Iranian officials. Russia and China are also expected to attend the meetings. The Iranian side says they want to remove all sanctions. The U.S. State Department says it will lift sanctions if Iran complies with the old deal. Under the 2015 agreement, the U.S. removed sanctions in return for limitations on Iran's nuclear program. This would make it harder for Iran to develop a nuclear weapon, even though Iran denies that it is trying to. And just ahead, nursing homes across the country begin to ease restrictions. In New York, elderly residents reunite with loved ones after a year of isolation. Police in Boulder, Colorado said they finished their investigative work at the grocery store that was the site of a mass shooting last month. Boulder police said on Twitter that the detectives finished their work inside the grocery store and they turned the scene back over to the company. But the store remains closed to the public. 10 people, including a Boulder police officer, were killed when a lone gunman opened fire at the King Soopers store on March 22nd. The suspect in the shooting rampage is charged with 10 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of attempted murder. New York State keeps opening up. Nightly curfews are now lifted, but not for all businesses. NTD's Arian Pastar has the story from New York City.
If you missed going to the gym after 11 p.m., then here's some good news. The curfew for gyms, movie theaters and bowling alleys has been lifted, meaning they can be open around the clock again. But restaurants and bars, they still have to shut their doors at 11 p.m. New York City's mayor was asked why restaurants and bars still have a curfew.
The later you go, behavior can be affected.
His medical team explained the decision further.
You've had a drink or two, or if you're in an environment where there's a lot of shouting or physical exertion, which we know also facilitates the spread of the virus.
New York City is speeding up vaccinating its residents.
We have now surpassed 500,000 doses in a week, and we can go farther.
Governor Cuomo came to Queens to announce the start of the Roll Up Your Sleeves program. It encourages people to get the vaccine. He says now is the time to defeat the virus once and for all.
And the first step towards doing that is you have to take the vaccine. You have to take the vaccine.
The mayor and the governor both say that the vaccine is the key to getting back to normal and reopening some more. State officials will look at the restaurant curfew at the end of the month, and if the numbers look good, New York City might soon return to being the city that never sleeps. Arian Pastar, NTD News, New York.
After over a year of isolation, nursing home residents in New York are reuniting with their loved ones. NTD's Andrew Thomas has the story.
Eileen Deniskia hasn't seen her son Michael in person for over a year. Last year, right before the family's annual St. Patrick's Day party, the pandemic shut down nursing homes in New York.
It's been a long time, so I was relieved to see how good she looked, all things considered.
We're going straight to that blue chair, okay?
Now, nursing homes and assisted living facilities around the country are easing restrictions and opening their doors. The reopening has inspired joyous reunions around the country after a painful year of isolation. The vaccination drive, improved conditions inside nursing homes, and relaxed federal guidelines have helped reunite elderly residents and their loved ones. Daniel Reingold, CEO of the Hebrew Home at Riverdale, said the facility created drive-through visits and arranged FaceTime calls. But there's nothing like a real hug.
Nothing compares to a hug, and nothing compares to seeing a loved one up close. And so that's been really the most invigorating and happy moment, is to actually see our families hugging each other for the first time, seeing each other up close.
Oh, you spoke Spanish?
Yeah. Ronald Corman and his mother Rosalind Rosenberg picked up right where they left off when they saw each other for the first time in a year.
My mother has been around longer than the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade. She beat it out by 5 years.
Yeah.
That's a piece of history.
After a tumultuous year, the reunions convey a sense of relief and hope for 2021. Andrew Thomas, NTD News.
Arkansas Governor Asa Hutchinson vetoed a bill that would ban children under 18 from getting transgender surgeries or hormone treatments. Governor Hutchinson spoke to the press, saying while well-intentioned, the bill was off course. State Senator Alan Clark explained the bill. He cited a study from the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry. It stated 90% of young adults who experienced gender dysphoria, or being unhappy with their gender, eventually ended up identifying with their biological gender. The bill also cited the risks of giving hormonal treatments. Hutchinson said he believes the bill interferes with medical care in the state, but he expects the Arkansas legislature could override his veto before the session ends. Democrat Senator Joe Manchin is seeking answers from the CDC after an HIV outbreak in West Virginia's largest county. It comes 2 months after a CDC official warned that the county's outbreak was the most concerning in the United States. But county officials think the CDC doesn't have the data to make concrete judgments. In part, the HIV surge is believed to be from sharing needles during illegal drug use. Manchin is requesting a response by Friday. And coming up, students in Southern California can go back to in-person learning for the remainder of the school year, but some teachers are still concerned. And a Vietnamese-American is warning her fellow citizens about the rising popularity of socialist ideas. She saw similar patterns in Vietnam before she fled the country. That and more on NTD News.
If you're like me, and I think it's actually most of us, then you're getting really fed up with the nonsense going on inside the banking system. I mean, we've worked hard our entire lives to retire comfortably. We just recovered from the crash of 2008, and it seems like it's about to happen all over again. Look at the too-big-to-fail banks. They're only getting bigger as the Fed hands them trillions of dollars daily, while simple folks like you and me, we're only getting the short end of the stick. That's why I'm glad I found this book called The Bank Failure Survival Guide. Give us a call, and we'll send you a free copy with no obligations whatsoever, just one American to another, telling you about some options that you might not have considered. Call 866-239-2619 today for your free copy of the Bank Failure Survival Guide. That's 866-239-2619.
The glory of piano masterpieces from the Baroque, Classical, and Romantic periods. New Tang Dynasty Television invites you to join the 2021 NTD International Piano Competition. Together, we preserve and revitalize the art of authentic classical piano music. October 2021 in New York City. Register now at piano.ntdtv.com.
Someone has to find the way to build the Great Dome. Completely new, completely original.
An Indiana man accused of throwing firebombs at police officers was indicted. 24-year-old Malik Muhammad was arrested in his home state and faces extradition to Oregon. He will face a 28-count indictment that includes attempted murder of law enforcement. Prosecutors say the charges stem from 4 separate incidents in the fall of 2020 in Portland. Muhammad allegedly traveled there for illegal activity. In some of the charges, he's accused of throwing a firebomb at an occupied police vehicle. In another incident, he allegedly threw a firebomb at a group of police officers. The Portland Police Bureau says Muhammad is also responsible for tens of thousands of dollars in damage to properties in the downtown area. A Vietnamese-American is warning that socialist ideas in America today could lead to communism. NTD's Eileen Eng has more.
Amy Fan West is a mother of 3, a small business owner, and is running for California State Senate. She was born in Vietnam, but escaped in 1985 due to the communist regime. Now she's warning Americans certain patterns playing out in the U.S. are similar to those in her home country. She says the government is creating problems that don't really exist.
They create the problem, they brainwash the people, because the more you tell the people something, they're going to start believing it, even though it's a lie, complete lie.
One example of this is the Stop Asian Hate movement, which West says is actually linked to a socialist agenda.
The media right now and the career politicians are wanting their political agenda to continue to stay in power. They have to pin us against each other. When we are pinned against each other, we're going to want more government to intervene to stop this chaos. That's what they do. They create the problem and then create the chaos, and then us begging for more government. It's them who created it in the first place, right?
West also points out that big tech plays a big role in spreading propaganda by limiting free speech.
I never felt this silencing on social media ever. I mean, we always have the freedom to share our mind and our thoughts, but the big tech are so much more powerful than our government, and they're silencing us and our voice and our opinion.
Another example she gives is the current administration's efforts to ban guns, which violates the Second Amendment, the right to bear arms.
Is to protect ourselves, not only our family and ourselves, but to protect us from our government. Because when government gets so powerful, we have that Second Amendment to defend ourselves and overturn the government if they're becoming a dictator.
West says people should elect officials who will defend freedom. She also encourages young people to think for themselves and not let social media intimidate them or dictate their thinking. Eileen Eng, NTD News.
Amid an abuse scandal, the Boy Scouts bankruptcy case could be getting pricey. A committee of child sex abuse survivors is asking a judge if they can submit their own reorganizational plan. That's because they say the current plan to compensate victims falls short. The committee says the $300 million fund up for consideration isn't enough. They say $103 billion is a more appropriate figure to cover the 84,000 abuse victims. The Boy Scouts' current child protection protocols have been in place since the mid-1990s. The organization put out a statement on the court filing. It says the Boy Scouts will continue to work with survivors and insurers to compensate victims. Students in the Los Angeles School District have the option to go back to the classroom. But some teachers are against the move, saying they don't have enough choice in the matter. Here's more from NTD's David Lamb.
Parents in the Los Angeles area now have the option to let their kids return to campus this month or continue with distance learning. But the United Teachers of Los Angeles is calling for the district to let teachers with children continue teaching remotely until they get subsidized childcare. A petition from the Action Network says the move doesn't give teachers the same kind of choice parents are being given. They claim it forces educators to choose between their families and their jobs. The petition got over 2,000 signatures. Supporters say it's a risk to have teachers come in person, especially when they have kids of their own. But critics pointed out other essential workers, like healthcare and grocery store employees, never stopped working in person, are also parents of children, and without guaranteed childcare. The LA Unified District announced hybrid teaching, as well as online-only models. Under the elementary school hybrid model, students will be on campus 5 days a week with the same group of students. Middle and high school students will be on campus 2 to 3 days a week. Students may return as early as this month. David Lamb, NTD News, California.
Officials say a double-mutant strain of the CCP virus has been discovered in California's Bay Area. This strain is believed to be behind a spike of cases in India. A San Francisco Chronicle report says the first case of the variant was confirmed by the Stanford Clinical Virology Lab. Stanford is also screening what could be 7 more cases of the double-mutant strain. The strain is believed to be more contagious and carries 2 mutations that may help it bind more easily in human cells. It's unclear whether the emerging strain is more resistant to the 3 CCP virus vaccines that have been authorized for emergency use in the U.S. A People's Vaccine Alliance poll shows some experts think the new variants will soon make current vaccines ineffective. Each new horrific mass shooting shocks the nation. One is too many, but we've had far too many. But one artist is responding to the tragedies with a project of hope and healing.
An artist in Portland, Oregon is fighting gun violence with crafts. She set out to raise awareness with hopes of helping heal and reduce the pain. The Gun Violence Archive says last year, attacks involving guns killed nearly 20,000 Americans.
The numbers are just too big to comprehend.
In 2017, after a mass shooting in Las Vegas, artist Leslie Lee started the Soul Box Project. Leslie asked people to make those small boxes and send them in for the exhibits. Each soul box holds space for one life lost or injured by gun violence, whether by defense, accident, or suicide. Last Friday morning, 724 hand-folded boxes appeared outside of the Maryland State House in Annapolis.
And it helps people to feel like they're taking some action in a way that's very beautiful. And folding the boxes was very meditative and calming.
More than 160,000 soul boxes have been created so far. The words and artworks on the boxes carry messages from people all over the country.
What we're talking about is having people recognize how big this issue is, that it's actually a national health crisis. And to use, if they own guns, use them responsibly.
Leslie said in October this year, her organization plans to display 200,000 soul boxes on the National Mall in Washington, D.C.
Coming up, Chinese military vessels enter international waters near Japan. The move comes after military exercises between the U.S. and its allies in the region. That and more on NTD News. Communist China sent a strategic military message over the weekend. In a rare move, its warships sailed near the Japanese waters. Both China and the United States have sent their carrier groups to the area.
China's aircraft carrier Liaoning and 5 warships were spotted passing through the Miyako Strait off southwestern Japan on Saturday. Japan has sent a destroyer and 2 patrol aircrafts to gather information and monitor the movements of the Chinese vessels. This is the first time the Liaoning is known to have passed through this waterway since last April. The movements come after the U.S. and its allies conducted military exercises in the region.
These naval moves and maneuvers are China sending a message to Japan and to the United States that it will not tolerate the Biden people following the Trump approach. They want a return to the pre-Trump era of Obama and Clinton.
Recently, China has been using large fleets of what it calls civilian boats to moor around Whitsun Reef in the disputed South China Sea. Manila has warned Beijing to withdraw what it considers maritime militia from its exclusive economic zone in the Spratly Islands. If they don't, China could face a barrage of diplomatic protests. Reportedly, a U.S. aircraft carrier strike group led by the USS Theodore Roosevelt entered the South China Sea.
The U.S. and other countries are telling China that the days of accepting its aggressive moves are now over and that the West will resist.
During a long phone call on Monday, Japanese Foreign Minister Toshimitsu Motegi urged his Chinese counterparts to halt its intrusions into Japanese waters around the Senkaku Islands in the East China Sea. President Biden is going to meet with Japanese Prime Minister Yoshihide Suga at the White House on April 16th. China will be at the top of their agenda.
It's no secret that Communist Party officials in China can amass a lot of wealth using their political power. But a recent corruption case still shocked many. An official was found to have embezzled over 2,700 real estate properties in 20 years. NTD's Tiffany Meyer has more on that.
Corruption taken to yet another level. Chinese media recently revealed the details of a CCP official's corruption case. It allows us to get a glimpse of just how much wealth CCP officials are able to amass. A regime official in China's northeastern Liaoning province, Xizang found to have embezzled more than $1.5 billion and more than 2,700 properties. She was sentenced to life imprisonment. He previously served as the mayor and the Communist Party secretary of a couple different cities in Liaoning province. Xi's family business has been in operation for more than 20 years, and he reportedly used his family's 20-plus companies to engage in criminal acts involving gangs. The companies operate in different sectors, including logistics, pawn shops, real estate, futures funds, among others. Using his political power, Xi made a fortune for his family business. With Xi's support, one of his brothers embezzled about $80 million of compensation money. It was through a demolition project in Dalian. The money was supposed to be given to residents whose houses had been demolished. Xi's family business assets exceeded over $1.5 billion. On top of the 2,700 properties, the assets also include creditors' rights worth around $900,000, plus lands, high-end cars, luxury wine, among others. The Xi family often collected debts through violent means. Measures they used reportedly include breaking people's hamstrings, cutting off their fingers, or crushing people to death with a car. Xi said at the trial that he doesn't know about these things. He also brushed them aside as trivial. Xi was sentenced to life imprisonment for organizing gang-related activities and more than a dozen other crimes last year. Chinese media reported that in the past 3 years, a total of $90 billion in assets related to gangs have been seized nationwide, and CCP officials were often involved in those crimes. Due to the lack of transparency, it is unknown how high the figure actually is.
Thousands of people are mourning those who died in Taiwan's worst rail disaster in 7 decades. A man suspected to be responsible for the crash is now in detention.
On Monday, the last body was retrieved from the wreckage of Taiwan's deadly train crash last week. Last Friday, an express train with about 500 passengers on board slammed into a truck near Hualien City. The train derailed and the front end was crushed. The crash caused 51 deaths, and the youngest victim was just 6 years old. More than 200 people were injured. The truck has slid down a slope from a construction site and landed onto the tracks. Officials suspect that the truck's brakes were not properly applied. The driver of the truck, Li Yinshan, apologized in tears last Sunday. Taiwanese authorities are now investigating him. A local courthouse says Li has to be in custody for at least 2 months to prevent him from destroying evidence. A passenger survived the tragedy but lost her husband and 2 children. While she was crying, a priest explained what happened to her family.
After waking up, she saw that her husband was not breathing and had no heartbeat beside her, and her son was not breathing and had no heartbeat either. She could not find her daughter. When she yelled, she found her daughter was stuck under the debris. She tried to move the debris, but her daughter's voice became quieter and quieter, and then there was no response.
Another mother is also mourning the death of her child. Her son was the train's driver. He escaped a deadly train accident 3 years ago. That's because he asked for a day off before the accident. But this time, he became the driver of the derailed train due to a schedule change. Over the weekend, relatives went to the site to mourn for their loved ones. Relatives will receive roughly $190,000 in compensation for each victim. Flags across Taiwan were lowered at half-mast for 3 days. All injured passengers will also get compensation. Taiwanese President Tsai Ing-wen paid her respects to the victims on Saturday. Taiwan's transport minister has been at the site since the accident. He announced over the weekend that he would resign. The Taiwanese government has yet to follow up on his resignation.
Up next, New Zealand and Australia are set to form a quarantine-free travel bubble. The move is aimed at giving the economies of both countries a boost. Usually people aren't happy to see a traffic cop, but for some Italians, seeing them back is a sign that life is getting better. Find out more on NTD News.
you have a life insurance policy you no longer need? Now you can sell your policy, even a term policy, for an immediate cash payment. Call Coventry Direct to learn more.
We thought we had planned carefully for our retirement.
But we quickly realized we needed a way to supplement our income.
Our friends sold their policy to help pay their medical bills. And that got me thinking. Maybe selling our policy could help with our retirement.
I was skeptical, so I did some research and called Coventry Direct. They explained life insurance is a valuable asset that can be sold.
We learned we could sell all of our policy or keep part of it with no future payments. Who knew? We sold our policy. Now we can relax and enjoy our retirement as we had planned.
If you have $100,000 or more of life insurance, you may qualify to sell your policy. Don't cancel or let your policy lapse without finding out what it's worth. Visit CoventryDirect.com to find out if your policy qualifies, or call 1-800-509-8500. Coventry Direct, redefining insurance.
When you look at TV networks in America, a soundbite and fight-it-out culture prevails on news and commentary programs. As a Canadian, I'm fascinated with America, and I wanted to offer American thought leaders an opportunity to share their thoughts in a deep dive format, where we can explore their ideas together. And so American Thought Leaders was born. The world's most brilliant thinkers believed that open discourse was the key to greatness. However, all around the world, we see that discourse is being stifled, and political agendas have subverted media. The Epoch Times launched its Global Thought Leaders program to bring back this great tradition of free thought. As the host of American Thought Leaders, every week I interview some of the most intriguing minds on the most pressing issues of our time. Be sure to check out our new episodes every week.
Israel's president announced his decision to mandate Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to form a new government, giving Netanyahu a new lease on his political life. It follows another inconclusive election.
A skeptical president invited Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on Tuesday to form a new government, after yet another inconclusive election deepened political stalemate in Israel. The country's longest-serving leader now faces the tough challenge of enlisting enough allies for a governing coalition. Under law, Netanyahu will have 28 days to do so. Announcing on television his choice of Netanyahu, President Reuven Rivlin cast doubt on any candidate being successful. The announcement came as his corruption trial entered its second day in a Jerusalem courthouse. Rivlin said that under Israeli law, Netanyahu, as the current prime minister, was not disqualified from being assigned the task, despite his indictment on corruption charges. Charged with bribery, breach of trust and fraud, Netanyahu has denied any wrongdoing, accusing the prosecution of an attempted coup.
This is how they try to overthrow a powerful prime minister from the right. This is what a coup looks like.
Israel's election on March 23rd was its fourth in 2 years. It ended with neither a Netanyahu-led right-wing and religious bloc, nor a prospective alliance of his opponents capturing a parliamentary majority. Continued deadlock could ultimately result in a new election.
Quarantine-free travel between Australia and New Zealand will begin on April 19th, but travel won't be the same as it was before the pandemic.
A travel bubble between New Zealand and Australia will kick off next week. New Zealand's Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern told reporters on Tuesday that quarantine-free travel will begin on April 19th for the neighbouring countries. She said that conditions for the bubble had been met and will give economic recovery a boost. New Zealand broadcaster One News said that the bubble is expected to run on a state-by-state basis and would restrict travellers from certain areas if there is an outbreak. The two countries faced mounting pressure from businesses to reopen borders. The plans for the bubble were previously shelved after sporadic outbreaks in some Australian cities. But both countries have managed the pandemic better than other developed nations, after closing their international borders to non-citizens relatively early during the health crisis. Australia has just over 900 deaths, and New Zealand recorded 24 deaths from COVID-19.
It's not often that people are happy to see a traffic cop, but for some Italians, it's a sight they missed during the pandemic. NTD's Arian Pastar has the story.
Police officers in the Piazza Venezia Square have been directing traffic since the 1920s. They used to have to carry their wooden box onto the paving stones at the beginning of their shift. Now the podium rises automatically. But for a little over a year, the podium has been out of use due to the nearby roadwork. And Rome, like the rest of the world, has been living through the CCP virus pandemic. There was no need for traffic control because of low traffic. But now one policewoman has returned to the podium and says she thinks of her role in artistic terms.
More than a ballet, it is more like an orchestra conductor, because we need to make all the drivers understand what we are saying with our hands. We need to make slow movements that are visible, so more like an orchestra conductor.
Shifts of 30 minutes are taken on the podium, otherwise arms get too tired.
It is tiring staying 7 hours on your feet, even though I view myself as a privileged person working in the center of Rome, which is the most beautiful city in the world.
For those out on the street, the warm sunshine and the traffic cop back on the podium seem to be a sign of things moving in the right direction following endless COVID lockdowns.
It is nice because this is something that has been in Rome for many years. It is a Roman tradition.
For many Italians, the sight of the Piazza Venezia traffic cop is as iconic as the Colosseum. Arian Pastar, NTD News.
A clip from a Russian TV station is going viral. It shows a dog giving a weather reporter a rough time.
One weather reporter from Moscow was in for a surprise when a dog suddenly snatched her microphone, forcing her to be the retriever.
It looks like we have lost the connection with our correspondent. We will try to get in touch with her once again.
The television station Mir posted the video that day. It went viral, getting almost 500,000 views in 4 days. Later, the weather correspondent got back her microphone and returned to finish her report about spring coming to the region.
As far as I can see, no one from our crew got hurt, apart from the microphone. Nadezhda, can you hear me?
Yelena, as I said before, the weather is great. It fits well for walking your dog. That's all for me. Stay tuned. It's interesting together.
It appears the reporter Fur gave the thief.
A 21-year-old British free climber scaled one of Europe's highest skyscrapers in Barcelona without any ropes or safety measures.
George King took his life in his hands again as he made his way to the top of the Melia Barcelona Sky Hotel, a seemingly impossible feat done without harness, not one for those without a head for heights. And this is not his first stunt. He free climbed the Shard in London in 2019. That feat earned him 6 months in the Young Offenders Centre for breaching a civil injunction taken out by the owners of the building. After a 20-minute climb, he reached the top of the 116-metre-high building. The applause from spectators below, a likely mix of amazement and belief. But the glory was short-lived. King was arrested by police on the way down. He's now facing a fine for climbing the building without permission. Free climber King is from Oxford but currently travelling around Europe. He also climbed the 144-metre Akbar Tower skyscraper in Barcelona before Christmas.
Still to come, scientists try to figure out the secrets behind one of the world's oldest carpets. It comes from a civilization that existed in what is now Serbia. And today marks the 125th anniversary of the modern Olympics. The postponed 2020 Games are scheduled to run from July 23rd to August 8th this summer. All that and more on NTD News. Have you ever seen carpets from the 3rd century BC? Scientists are discovering the advanced science behind one of the world's oldest carpets. It explains why the colors can be kept on it for so long.
This is one of the world's oldest carpets. It's got an intricate design with a pleasing geometric pattern. On the border, there are griffins, deer, and men with horses.
This carpet is important for Pazric culture according to the stylistic peculiarities of the details. It originates from the Persian Empire.
The Paziric culture existed in what is now Siberia, roughly 2,500 years ago. Much of what we know about the culture is from excavations in the Siberian permafrost. Archaeologists discovered this carpet in a tomb in 1949. It's the world's oldest known example of a knotted pile carpet, woven in a special Turkish knot. But the carpet was not a showpiece. Experts believe it lay at the center of generations of homes. It was used heavily and then buried for thousands of years. Yet the colors are still vivid. That's because the craftsmanship is actually quite advanced. Scientists have discovered that people back then used a special dyeing technique to make the colors bright and lasting.
Textile dyeing is one of the oldest crafts of human civilization. But from a scientific point of view, it combines principles of biotechnology and material science. So on the one hand, it's very old, but on the other hand, it's also very sciencey, very modern, very high-tech.
The craftsmen fermented the wool before dyeing it. This frayed the fiber's outer layer, allowing the dye to seep into the cloth. Scientists replicated this process in a lab. When they compared the distribution of the dye in their samples, they matched with the ancient carpets. With such long-lasting color and intricate designs, it's easy to see why Persian carpets have long set the standard for quality rugs.
It's a special day for the modern Olympics. It's the 125th anniversary since the ancient games were re-established. NTD's Andrew Thomas has the story.
Tuesday, April 6, 2021, marks the 125th anniversary of the first modern Olympic Games, which took place in Athens in 1896. The 10-day event was officially known as the Games of the First Olympiad. It was the largest international sporting event, with 241 athletes from 14 countries competing in 43 events. About two-thirds of the participants were from Greece. American James Connolly became the first Olympic champion of the modern games, winning the triple jump. The game's success was cemented when Greek Spiridon Louis won the marathon. The event was introduced to commemorate the legend of Phidippides bringing the news of the victory over the Persians at the Battle of Marathon in 490 BC. The ancient Olympic Games were held between 776 BC and 393 AD in Olympia. After more than 15 centuries, Baron Pierre de Coubertin of France, known as the founder of the modern Olympics, proposed reviving the Olympic Games. In 1894, an agreement was reached at the International Paris Congress to re-establish the Olympics. The Tokyo 2020 Olympics were delayed for a year because of the pandemic. They're now set to run from July 23rd to August 8th, and the Paralympics are set to run from August 24th to September 5th. Andrew Thomas, NTD News.
And that's all for now. Catch us again tonight at 6:30 Eastern. I'm Kevin Hogan.
We have a new channel. Subscribe to us on YouTube at NTD News. Get the highlights of our news broadcast and the most important headlines that we curate especially for you.
Don't miss out on important news. Our videos are being deleted. So if you don't want to be cut off from honest news, take a moment to sign up for our newsletter at newsletter.ntd.com so you don't lose access to NTD. Go to newsletter.ntd.com to sign up for our evening newsletter.